After the first battle of independence, the Ottoman Sultan from Turkey wrote a letter, and that was forwarded by the British to the Indian Muslims, saying that the Ottoman Empire condemned the Indian Muslim support to the First War of Independence and that they should be loyal to the British. The British are allies. That right from 1840, 1841, the Mopla Muslims were committing grievous atrocities and grievous outrages against Hindus in Malabar. Towards the end of World War I, by 1918, the seeds of Khilafat had been sowed. The grievance of the Indian Muslim was attached to the Turkish Caliphate, not to India. The Delhi anti-Hindu riots. It was planned right from the 5th of December. The first murder was of a constable called Ratan Lal, who was a kafir working for a kafir state. And we were told by the entire global media that it was an anti-Muslim pogrom. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So the subject is Khilafat 2.0, and I'll start with a few quotes. Do you think we only have the history of Hudaybiyah? If you forget, we will remind you about Badr, Ud, and Karbala. Do you think we only know how to talk about Swabar? Then you are mistaken. You should learn about our jihad. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. This was said by Barkhadat Shiro Ladida Saklun on 11th of December 2019, the day the violence broke out in Delhi. We dream of a 2047 where the political power has returned to the Muslim community from whom it was unjustly taken away by the British. PFI cadres and Muslim youths should repeatedly be told that they were working for Deen. Allah had created the Kainat and Muslims were made for two reasons. The first, to establish the law of Allah, and the second, Muslims are Dai on earth. This should always be kept in mind. Along with this, PFI spoke about turning India into an Islamic nation, replacing the constitution with the Sharia, arming Muslims so that they can kill coward Hindus. During the FIFA World Cup, Muslim journalist, not my words, her words, Muslim journalist Rana Ayub extended unbridled support to Morocco. She said that she was standing in solidarity with Morocco and Palestine. She also sent a lot of love to Morocco. Now, do we think Rana Ayub is a great football fan? Because I tried to check, there were hardly any tweets or hardly any posts about football. So why did she extend that support to Morocco? Morocco is a Muslim nation. Rana Ayub's support to Morocco, PFI's plans, and Ladida Saklun's Facebook post points towards the Muslim Indian population's commitment to the Ummah. The Ummah is the global Muslim brotherhood. And to understand why the Indian Muslim has this unbridled support towards the Ummah far more than their own nations and far more than their own Hindu brethren, so-called, we have to travel a little back in time to Kerala. It was the loyalty towards the Khilafat started much before we know. It didn't start with the Khilafat movement in the 1920s. I would have you know that it was first invoked by the British when Lord Wellesley forwarded a letter from the Ottoman Empire to the tyrant Tipu Sultan. It was said that Tipu Sultan should mend his relationship with the British Empire because the British were allies. This was a letter written by the Ottoman Sultan. It was next invoked in 1857, right after the First Battle of Independence. After the First Battle of Independence, the Ottoman Sultan from Turkey wrote a letter, and that was forwarded by the British to the Indian Muslims, saying that the Ottoman Empire condemned the Indian Muslim support to the First War of Independence and that they should be loyal to the British. The British are allies. After that, of course, you saw the Indian Muslim commitment towards the freedom struggle dwindle vastly. So the sentiment of Ummah within the Indian Muslim population started from the mid-1800s. It was not about the Khilafat at that time. It was not about Mecca. It was not about any of that. It was from the Ottoman Empire directly to the Indian Muslims. Interestingly, while the British were using the Ottoman Empire to buy the loyalty of the Indian Muslim, the Mopla Muslim had already started committing atrocities against Hindus in Malabar. I bought two books where government communication of that time in Malabar was documented. One of the first communication was from 1846. In 1846, a Mopla Muslim chopped up a Nayar Hindu youth and he went and hid in a mosque. When he was hiding in the mosque, the British, of course, came and they were trying to get him out to surrender. He said that he will die fighting the infidels, and he was, of course, gunned down. In that communication, it was clearly mentioned that right from 1840, 1841, the Mopla Muslims were committing grievous atrocities and grievous outrages against Hindus in Malabar. Now, of course, if the government communication says that grievous outrages were being committed by Mopla Muslims right from 1841, I think we can safely assume that right from 1830s, they were committing these atrocities against Hindus. Towards the end of World War I, by 1918, the seeds of Khilafat had been sowed because the Ottoman Empire was breaking up. The first meeting in India regarding the Khilafat movement was held on February 9th, 1990. It was the first Khilafat Day was then observed on October 17th, 1919. In Delhi, there was a Khilafat conference which was held. In this conference, a resolution was adopted saying that the Indian Muslim is going to refrain from joining the celebrations of World War I and are going to boycott it, boycott British goods, boycott everything British in the demand that the Ottoman Empire and the Sultan be restored. The Congress leaders at that time had extended full support to the Khilafat movement. On 24th November, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi went on to proclaim that he would go on a non-cooperation movement because the Hindus were in support of the Indian Muslims in their quest for Khilafat, in their quest for the Caliphate, the Turkish Caliphate. He called it a just cause. The Congress was, of course, of the hope that the British would give us our independence if we participated in World War I, in which Indians took part in hordes. Of course, that did not happen. Soon, the Rowlatt Act was established by the British, and there were widespread atrocities against Indians. In one such protest against the Rowlatt Act, as we all know, the Jallianwala Bagh massacre happened. Now, it is interesting how to Nehru and Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, Jallianwala Bagh massacre was sort of clubbed together with the demand for the Turkish Caliphate. In Amritsar, in December 1990, there was a congressional meeting that was held, an annual session. In that, Mr. Motilal Nehru, in his presidential address on 27 December, categorically stated that the demand was for justice in the Jallianwala Bagh massacre and, of course, to concede to the Muslim demand of the caliphate in Turkey. He said, "It is impossible for one part of the nation to stand aloof while the other part is suffering a serious grievance." The grievance of the Indian Muslim was attached to the Turkish caliphate, not to India. They weren't even protesting against the Rowlatt Act, really. They were just bothered about the caliphate. In the Nagpur session in December 1920, the Congress gave the British a deadline of 1 year, not only to deliver justice in the Jallianwala Bagh massacre case, but also to establish the caliphate in Turkey. At the annual session in 1920 in Nagpur, the Khilafat leaders read Quranic verses. They called for jihad against infidels. When this was condemned and Mohandas Gandhi was questioned, he said, "Oh, they're talking about the British bureaucracy, not about Hindus, only the British bureaucracy because they're the only infidels according to him." While Gandhi and Nehru extended their support to the Khilafat movement, the Mopla Muslims were already going on rampages against Malabar Hindus. This is 100 years, in 1800s, 100 years before finally a genocide of the Malabar Hindus took place. So far, the outrages against Malabar Hindus were considered low-level violence. I'm of course not saying that the outrages were not severe, but they were not coordinated mass action like a genocide. I'll give you an example. In 1894, for example, there were several Muslims who went on a rampage in Malabar, started desecrating temples and all of that. They then took shelter in a temple, and when they were asked to come out, they of course came out in a hail of fire and died. In the book by Deputy Collector of Calicut, Mr. Gopalan Nair, he writes that there was no trigger for this sort of violence that could be recognized. It was just a result of unbridled Mohammedan fanaticism. On the 25th of February 1896, a gang of 20 Mopla Muslims went on a killing spree. They terrorized the village. The book says that during this period, Hindus were murdered and their hair was cut off. They were forcefully converted to Islam as well. In February 1919, for example, a gang of Mopla Muslims, headed by a dismissed Mopla head constable, began to brew trouble. Following their usual methods, they broke in and defiled several temples. They killed almost every Brahmin and Nair that they could find in their path. They died in a hail of fire, of course. After hundreds and thousands of such incidents of low-level violence for over 100 years, right from the mid-1800s, finally, in 1921, there was a mass genocide of Hindus in Malabar by the Mopla Muslims. In August 1921, it is estimated by official numbers that over 10,000 Malabar Hindus were murdered. This is an official estimate, so we can obviously assume that the real number was much higher. The Khilafat movement had built up to the Malabar genocide of Hindus. There were women who were raped by the Muslims. There were Hindus who were beheaded. There were families that were annihilated and even burnt alive. There's one such incident in which a pregnant Hindu woman was murdered and her fetus was pulled out of her body. She lay bleeding on the road. I'll narrate one more incident, one more massacre during the Malabar genocide of Hindus. On the 25th of September 1921, a Khilafat leader held a rally of about 4,000 Mopla Muslims. In that, there were calls to jihad that were made, Quranic verses that were read, and then 40 Hindus were caught hold of. 38 were murdered. Only 3 of the 38 were shot. The rest were beheaded and thrown into the Thuvur well. It is said that even 3 days after the beheading, there were some of them who had life left in them. The Mopla Muslims went down the well, made sure that they beheaded them completely, and came out again. I will narrate what Mr. Nair writes in his book about this incident. Just at the brink, there is a small tree. The executioner stood here and, after cutting the neck with his sword, pushed the body into the well. Many of the people who were thus thrown in were not dead, but escape was impossible. The sides of the well are cut in hard laterite rock, and there are no steps. It is said that some people were crying out from the well even on the 3rd day of the massacre. They must have died a peculiarly horrible death. At the time when this massacre was perpetrated, it was a rainy season, and there is some water in the Week, but now it's dry. And any visitor can have a look at the gruesome sight. The bottom is entirely filled with human bones. Pandit Rishi Ram, the Arya Samaj missionary, who was standing by my side, counted 30 skulls. One skull deserves particular mention. It is still seen divided neatly into 2 halves. This is said to be the skull of an old man named Kumara Panikar, whose head was slowly cut into 2 halves by means of a saw. Does anybody draw a parallel? The skull cut into 2 with a saw? It happened in Kashmir, when a woman was cut into 2 with a saw. The 3 judges who presided over a special tribunal in Calicut about the Malabar genocide said that the Moplas have been described as a barbarous and savage race, and unhappily, the description seems appropriate at the present day. This is a court ruling. This is not the figment of the right-wing imagination. He went on to say that they went on a rampage against the Hindu population of Malabar. This is a court proceeding again. Now, people like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar to Annie Besant, They have widely written about the Malabar genocide of Hindus and condemned the violence that the Muslim hordes went against the Hindus. However, our left historians want us to believe to date that the Malabar genocide of Hindus was indeed a peasant uprising. So the left historians tell us that the peasants of the time were mostly Muslims and the landlord were Hindus who were a savage, barbaric bunch. And the Muslims went on a rampage against the Hindus because the Hindu landlords were treating them unfairly. Now, there is an 1852 report by one Mr. T.L. Strange. He was a British commissioner who was sent to Malabar in 1852. Again, this is almost 70 years before the genocide actually took place. And Mr. T.L. Strange categorically said that the outrages by the Mopla Muslims against the Hindus were a result of Mohammedan fanaticism, that the Hindu landlords were extremely kind and they were treating their Muslim peasants well, and that any of these outrages were not a result of a peasant uprising against Hindu landlords, but pure and simple jihad. Do you see a parallel? Do you remember any riot, attempted genocide recently which was packaged differently to make sure that Hindus forget their own genocide? The Delhi anti-Hindu riots. It was planned right from the 5th of December. The first murder was of a constable called Ratan Lal, who was a kafir working for a kafir state. And we were told by the entire global media that it was an anti-Muslim pogrom, when Hindus were killed amid chants of Nara-e-Takbir, Allahu Akbar, when Tahir Hussain went on record to say that their aim was to teach kafirs a lesson. Moving back to 1921. In November 1921, the Congress Working Committee appointed a committee headed by, of course, a Muslim, Faiz Tyabji, to understand the kind of outrages that were committed against Hindus in Malabar. It had to be headed by a Muslim, of course, because how can a Hindu be fair? It is only a Muslim who can fairly evaluate whether his co-religionists murdered Hindus. There were 2 Muslims in the panel and only 1 Hindu, because Hindus who are being killed don't really deserve a voice. In a few months' time, the committee was disbanded without really carrying out an investigation. At the Congress National Session held in Ahmedabad in 21, the acting president, again a Muslim, Mr. Hakim Ajmal Khan, expressed regret over these scandalous events. There was a resolution which was proposed to condemn the violence. Guess why it didn't go through? Because one Mr. Hasrat Mohani opposed the resolution to condemn the Mopla violence. In the 36th annual session, of course, the Congress leaders distanced themselves from the violence, hardly condemned it, and blamed the British instead of the Mopla Muslims who had declared jihad against Hindus and on record wanted to rid Malabar of the Kafirs. The Khilafat movement more or less propelled Muslim nationalism in Indian Muslims. Now, Muslim nationalism is very different from Hindu nationalism, and we'll come to that at the later part of this talk. While the Mopla outrages were happening, while the Malabar Hindus were being murdered in 1921, 1922, in 1923, a book, Rangila Rasool, was published. Now, we all know that Rangila Rasool was published because it was a satirical take on the life of the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad. However, very few of us know that Rangila Rasool was actually published in response to 2 books that was published by the Muslims insulting Hindus. It is only after that that Mahashay Rajpal decided to publish Rangila Rasool. What happened then? In 1929, Mahashay Rajpal was brutally murdered because the Muslims were upset. Interestingly, the murderer of Mahashay Rajpal was represented in court by none other than Muhammad Jinnah. And Muhammad Iqbal, who is now a liberal hero, sang peons of the murderer. What we also perhaps don't talk about as often is that the murder of Mahashay Rajpal led to the British passing 295A. 295A, which we now know as a more or less draconian act, which prosecutes and persecutes anybody who offends anybody else's religious feelings. Now, it came into being because a bunch of Muslims were extremely upset about a book that was published after Muslims insulted Hindus because their feelings were hurt. They murdered a man, they ran rampages, they ran riots, and the British thought, oh, if we don't appease them and if we don't assuage their easily hurt sentiments, they're going to murder again and they're going to riot again. And therefore, 295A was passed. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, of course, condemned Mahashay Rajpal. He said that just because the Muslims had insulted the Hindu sentiment, there was no reason for Mahashay Rajpal to do the same and offend the Muslims. He even justified, to a large extent, the violence, saying that the Muslims were hurt, poor things. While Mahashay Rajpal was murdered in 1929 for a book that was in response to the insult to Hindus, as I just said, in 1924, the Kohat violence took place. Now, what is the common thread between the murder of Mahashay Rajpal and the Kohat violence? During the Kohat violence, the imams from mosques had started making outrageous speeches against Hindus, calling for jihad of kafirs, of course. At that time, the Hindus had decided to respond in their own coin, and therefore they, wrote a couple of poems that called out the Muslims for their hate, for their kafir hate. Now, the moment the Hindus decided that, all right, these Muslims have gone on and said that they want to commit jihad against Hindus, so why don't we say something in return as well? The moment the Hindus decided to protect themselves and defend themselves, the Muslim hordes went on a riot again. Thousands of Hindus' homes were burnt, Hindus were murdered, so on and so forth. Again, those who were condemned were the Hindus. They were blamed for their own genocide, for their own murder. Why would you respond to the Muslims? They said. In 1946, now that we've spoken about the 1920s and the Malabar genocide, we've understood the contours of it. Let's come to 1946. The massacre of Hindu in Bengal was carefully coordinated by Jinnah. He chose the 16th day of Ramadan to coordinate the direct action day. Why the 16th day of Ramadan, you said? Because on that day, Prophet Muhammad himself fought the battle of Badr and he defeated the Kafirs. It was said that the Muslims had fought this war and won this war with divine intervention of Allah. Now that we're talking about Battle of Badr, do you remember who else mentioned the Battle of Badr in the beginning of my speech? Ladida Zakloon, on the 11th of December 2019, when Delhi was engulfed in violence. She too said that they know how to fight the Battle of Badr, which is essentially Prophet Muhammad and Muslims fighting a decisive victory over Kafirs. On the 16th of August, of course, 16th of August 1946, Calcutta was littered with posters lionizing Jinnah. One of the posters by the mayor said, Kafir, toder dongsherar deri nei, shorbik hatyakand ghotpe. It essentially means that the massacre is not far away and the end is not far away. You will be murdered. The aim was to make Bengal the land of the pure and to ensure that Hindus were driven out. What followed on the 16th night, I think we all know. Hindu men were beheaded, women were raped, homes were burnt. When the Muslims went on a rampage against Hindus during the direct action day, there was one man, Gopal Patha, who stood up and took weapons. He decided that he will defend Hindus, because the outrages were started by the Muslims. Mr. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi again went to Mr. Gopal Patha and told him to lay down arms. Mr. Gopal Patha refused. He said he will defend his brethren. Mr. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, I'm guessing, was not very happy, but thankfully for us, Gopal Patha prevailed. What I have said so far, basically right from mid-1800s to 1946, there are certain themes that emerge from over 100 years of Muslim outrages against Hindus. One, for over a century, Hindus kept getting massacred. over and over and over again. Hindu women kept getting raped over and over and over again. Hindu homes kept getting burnt over and over and over again. The Hindu leaders of that time decided to look away. All of their outrages were packaged differently. The Khilafat movement was packaged as a freedom struggle. Oh, the Musalman just wants freedom from the British, and therefore it's Khilafat. The Khilafat word was also chosen quite intelligently, because when a normal human being, when a normal Hindu listens to the word Khilafat, he thinks that you're against something. Khilaf. You're against the British. But the Khilafat is just another word for the caliphate, which means they were fighting for the caliphate in Turkey. The outrage against Hindus and the naked display of Islamism was always given a victimized twist. Oh, they murdered Mahashay Rajpal because they were offended. Oh, they murdered Hindus in Kohat because they were offended. Oh, they joined Khilafat. This is Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi's words, that Hindus were just not in a position to make the Musalman feel like they were their brothers, and therefore they were hurt, and therefore they went on the Malabar genocide of Hindu rampage. The authorities have also only woken up when Hindus decided to defend themselves or retaliate. After Noakhali, when the Noakhali violence was happening, Nehru and Mr. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi maintained a studious silence, not a word. They only spoke up when a Bihar happened in response to a Noakhali. They went to Bihar to assuage the Muslims who were by now crying victims, saying that, oh, the barbaric Hindus are murdering us. But nobody saw that before Bihar happened, in Noakhali, thousands and thousands and thousands of Hindus were beheaded, raped, murdered. And last but not the least, the state only wakes up to Muslim street veto. 295A was passed not because Hindus were hurt when they published 2 books against Hindus. It was passed because the Muslims decided to go on a rampage and murder Mahashay Rajpal. We see parallels today, don't we? All the conclusions that we've drawn right now, whether it's the deracinated state waking up only when the Musalman decides to take to the street, whether it's Hindus being told that, hey, it's your fault that you're being murdered, you didn't make the Muslim feel like he's your brother. You didn't make sure that the Muslim was not hurt. You dared to respond. You dared to publish a book. You dared to write 2 poems after the Muslims called you kafirs, after the Muslims insulted your idols and your murtis. How dare you? You should have kept quiet and died with a smile on your face. This is again Mr. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Now, let's keep in mind all of these conclusions that we've drawn, and let's come back to what's happening now. Since we've in brief covered about 100 years of Muslim outrages against Hindus. When the year 2022 started, I think all of us were just limping back to normalcy after the 2020 anti-Hindu riots. We could still remember Ankit Sharma being stabbed multiple times and his intestine being pulled out of his body. We could still remember Dilbar Negi with his hands and legs chopped off, burnt alive in Anil Sweets. We remember these victims. After 2020, even when 2022 started, we were talking about them. We were documenting the cases. So what happens when 2022 starts? On the 6th of January 2022, ISIS comes out with a magazine, with their magazine edition. In the new edition, it asks Muslims to take back the illegal structure called Babri, which was built by invaders on Ram Janmabhoomi. And they, of course, call for jihad against, quote unquote, dirty cow piss drinkers, which is Hindus. How many liberals do you hear throwing that jive at us now, that we are dirty cow piss drinkers? Anyway, while the January edition of ISIS was released, you were transported back to 2020 because it was on the 27th of February 2020 when ISIS introduced their India-centric magazine. Now, 27th February 2020 is a special date because the anti-Hindu violence in Delhi was just about dwindling. I think it peaked on the 26th, and on 27th morning itself, also there were certain incidents of violence. But this was in the throes of the Delhi anti-Hindu riot that ISIS decided to come out with their India-centric magazine. It's not about religion, of course, we are told. On the cover of the magazine, they had the lawyer Mahmood Paracha, who had held a seminar in a mosque not too long ago, saying that Muslims and Dalits need to be armed for self defense and they need to be helped so that they can acquire arms license. Now, why is this Muslim and Dalit trope important? If you remember, in the PFI 2047 document, where they wanted to turn India into an Islamic nation, they had also mentioned that the Muslims can rule if they are in minority, but they only need 50% of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe vote. And for that, they need to keep reminding them of the so called atrocities that they had faced in the past. So, this was a very carefully crafted Jai Bhim, Jai Meme sort of a trope which was being furthered. While this is being furthered, Op India, almost on a daily basis, is recording cases where the Muslim hordes are going on rampages against Dalits. But again, we won't get into that too much. Now, when we talk about the Delhi anti Hindu riots, we mainly talk about what happened in February 2020. But the violence actually started in 2019. One of the first incidents of violence in 2019 that I remember is Haus Qazi. I don't know how many of you would remember that. I had gone to Haus Qazi. It's a small area in Chandni Chowk in the heart of Delhi. And we had covered this case where a very tiny temple, a Durga Mandir, was desecrated by a Muslim mob. The Muslim mob was easily over 200, 300 people, according to locals. When I went there, I saw that the murtis were broken, and the locals told me that the Muslim mob had even urinated on the murtis. When I took a tour of the mandir, I went inside the gully. It's a very narrow gully, and only Hindus live in that gully. Otherwise, they're completely surrounded by Muslims. The glass of the mandir was also broken. The locals showed me that the Delhi police had got new murtis and new glass overnight to replace the ones in the mandir so that the news would not go out that the Muslims had gone on a rampage and allegedly urinated on the murtis and desecrated the temple. I saw all of that and I came out of the gully. A husband and wife were sitting on the road. A mother was clutching a piece of paper and she was wailing uncontrollably. I asked the locals what happened and why she's crying. Her 14-year-old Hindu son was missing since the violence broke out in that area. I was standing in the middle. There was a barricade. The Hindus were chanting Jai Shri Ram and the Muslims were screaming Allahu Akbar, Narai Takbir. I spoke to the Muslims as well, by the way. They blamed a random Hindu halwai who fanned violence. I found no evidence of that. The Hindu halwai was just that. He was a halwai. And apparently the fight broke out over parking spaces. But I refuse to believe that because according to the locals, they were trying to drive out the Hindu population from that narrow lane so that it could be a complete Muslim dominated area. Now back to this mother. She's wailing, screaming, crying. And I asked the locals what happened. She said the boy was missing. And according to the parents, the Muslims had kidnapped him. There was no evidence, of course. I'm not the police, but we did have the copy of the FIR. I came back to my hotel room in Delhi. At that time, I was happily living in Calcutta, not anymore, but anyway. I came back to my hotel room in Delhi and I started writing the report. I started writing the report after my boss, Rahul Roshan, who's sitting over there, yelled at me uncontrollably because he did not want to give me 2-3 hours to rest. So I started writing the report and it was released. Immediately after the report, we were slammed. Op India was criticized by left portals who I don't wish to name. They went on a rampage saying that how dare you report that a Hindu boy is missing in this violence? How do you know he was missing? How do you know that the Muslims took him? If you're reporting the version of the parents and if you're reporting the version of the FIR without a police investigation, you are merely fanning more tension in the area. This is a 14-year-old boy who's missing. Once the boy was found, hale and hearty, alive, I will not get into why I think or how I think he was found, but he was found. The media wrote that, look, the boy has been found alive. Op India was trying to fan tension. So we should have reported that a Hindu boy was missing, a child, only if he turns up dead. If there is a dead body, the media can report that, okay, a Hindu boy is dead, he's been killed. But if he is missing and you report the boy missing, then you're fanning tension. Because who the hell cares? It's a Hindu boy. If he's missing, he'll come back. Nobody cares about a Hindu life anyway. After horse Qazi settled down a little bit, the Hindus decided that they were going to hold a Hanuman Chalisa chanting at the mandir. While that was happening, a lot of media houses covered that these amazing Muslim men from the area, who a little while ago were going on a rampage against the Hindus, were so benevolent that they were actually helping serving food to the Hindus of the area who were going to do a Hanuman Chalisa recital. They are so plural and so tolerant. Hindus are just blaming them for no good reason. The Hindus, of course, denied it. They said that the Muslims came for a photo op, they clicked pictures and they went away. They have not done anything for the Hindus. In every riot, by the way, you see this theme. There were Muslims protecting the temple. They made a chain to protect the temple so that no harm came to it. Nobody tells you that the Muslims were protecting the temple from the Muslims itself. It was not the Hindus pelting stone at their own temple. So it's a sleight of hand by the media to ensure that so innocent and so peace loving and so plural Muslims don't get a bad name, but we know better now. After the horse Qazi incident, there was a spate of violence in 2019. By October, there were a spate of incidents of stone pelting and violence against Durga Puja and Dasera processions, if you remember, in 2019. In Balrampur, a Durga Puja procession was attacked amidst chants of Pakistan Zindabad. Remember, we spoke about Ummah. So that this is why the Muslims in India will chant Pakistan Zindabad, because their loyalty lies to the land of the pure. Dar-ul Islam, not Darul Harb. In Gorakhpur, meat pieces were thrown strategically on the path of the Durga Puja procession. It was done purely to humiliate and mock Hindus, no other purpose. In Badaun, temple idols were vandalized and desecrated. In Arunachal Pradesh and Assam too, murtis were desecrated and they came under siege because stones were being pelted by the Muslim mob. There were several such incidents. I've just told you 3 or 4. And these are just the ones that Op India could document. India is a vast country. We don't know how many such incidents really took place in 2019. It was around the same time when Durga Puja processions and Diwali celebrations, etc., came into attack that Kamlesh Tiwari was murdered. It was on 18th October that 2 Muslims tried to behead him. He was shot, he was stabbed multiple times. Tiwari was murdered apparently for his alleged remarks against the Prophet of Islam. I will not repeat those comments because I like my head firmly attached to the rest of my body, so I'm going to skip that. But Kamlesh Tiwari was then murdered for a 2015 comment. By December, after Kamlesh Tiwari was murdered, most of November, I think we were all trying to cover the investigation surrounding the Kamlesh Tiwari murder, how these two had come with sweets, how they had pretended to be Hindus while befriending him on Facebook, so on and so forth. By December 2019, our politicians then went on a rampage. They started spreading misinformation and they started fighting violence during the anti-CAA protests. On 14th of December, I'll give you an example. Sonia Gandhi of the Congress Party said that we have to make a sacrifice to protect India, and this is an aar paar ki ladai. This was Sonia Gandhi's speech on 14th. There is a video of that. Mamata Banerjee also, of course, said that her party would hold protests against CAA, NRC, which was, by the way, not even drafted. But anyways, she was protesting. The politicians very maliciously compared them to the Assam violence that was happening against CAA. And I won't get into too much detail, but it suffices to say that the protest in Assam was of a completely different nature. They were actually batting for NRC because they wanted Clause 6 to be upheld. Clause 6 essentially of the Assam Accord means that the linguistic cultural identity of Assam will be protected, which means that they did not want anybody to settle in Assam other than Assamese. So therefore, they were in a sense batting for NRC, not against it. But our politicians couldn't care less. The violence erupted in Delhi on the 11th of December 2019. 11th of December is the same date that Ladida Sakloon had called for jihad against Kafirs. She had invoked the Battle of Badr, the Battle of Oud and Karbala. During the violence and the protests that preceded the violence, slogans like Hinduon se azadi, Jinnah wali azadi, Hindu teri kabar khudegi, I think AMU ki dharti pe, if I'm not wrong, which fact checkers told us, no, it was Hindutva ki kabar khudegi, as if there's any difference. But anyway, these were the slogans that we heard. Now, when the Delhi anti-Hindu riots broke out in February 2020, the first person, as I said, to be murdered was a Kafir constable, Ratan Lal, who was working for a Kafir state. He was not murdered because he was a police officer. He was murdered because he was Hindu. Let there be no doubt about that. Now we know from the charge sheets that the conspiracy of the Delhi anti-Hindu riots started on the 5th of December 2019. Op India published a report where right from December up until the Delhi anti-Hindu violence, every single day there were attacks against Hindus and there was violence by Muslims and their leftist ideological backbones who were fanning that violence against CAA. Tahir Hussain was a major part of that conspiracy. It was on the 8th of Jan that Tahir Hussain met Umar Khalid and Khalid Saifi in Shaheen Bagh, apparently the PFI office, and they had hatched a plan to teach Kafirs a lesson. He confessed in his disclosure statement. Now let me clarify, disclosure statement is not evidence unless based on the disclosure statement, the police makes discovery of a crime. But I will still read out and I'll still tell you what he says in his disclosure statement. He said that it was a coordinated campaign to teach Kafirs a lesson. He said that he used his house because it was under construction and he thought that it would not come under suspicion. In one part of the disclosure statement, he actually talks about how they blocked the bridge that was connected the rest of the Delhi to his area so that the police could not enter. Now, there is one thing very interesting. He mentions that the mob went on a rampage specifically against Hindus. He mentions the words Hindus, screaming slogans like Allahu Akbar, Narai Takbir. After all of this happened, channels like NDTV told us that Tahir Hussain had released a video at that time saying that, hey, I am not the perpetrator of violence, I am a victim of communal violence. He said that I have made several calls to PCR because I am so worried about the communal violence in my area and the police is not responding and therefore it's the police's fault and therefore it's Amit Shah's fault and therefore it's Modi's fault and therefore it's all Hindus' fault. Now, this video was taken as the gospel truth by our media. I will say gospel truth because I think for the media it has to be the gospel. We can't have any Hindu connotations lest we be branded communal. They took this video confession as the gospel truth and said that the Godi media was fanning tension by saying that Tahir Hussain was responsible for the riots and he's being targeted because he's Muslim. In his disclosure statement, right after he says that one of the chants that his people were giving was Maro Kafiro ko Maro, he says that he made multiple calls to the PCR so that he creates a decoy for himself, so that later he can claim that he was a victim of violence. So he was basically going to the area of violence. He was helping in stone pelting Hindus. This is where Ankit Sharma was murdered as well. Then he was running back to his house, making these PCR calls, and then going back to commit violence. This is in his own words in the disclosure statement that has been taken by the Delhi police, the special cell. Coming back to 2022, this is what happened in 2019 in the run-up to 2020 Delhi anti-Hindu riots. In just the first 4 months of 2022, this year, we saw a spate of quote-unquote blasphemy killings. How many of us remember Kishan? He was murdered by 2 bike-borne assailants, Muslims, because he had posted a video where he said that Krishna was the ultimate god. His fault was that he had included in that video a representation of the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad. He was murdered for that fault. He was murdered for that sin of including a video and saying that his God is greater than the Prophet of Islam. Even those who demanded justice for Kishan were attacked, beaten up by Muslims. There are documented cases. Another Hindu activist, Harsha, was murdered as well. He had enraged the Islamist again over some blasphemous post which he had posted in 2015, and he was then murdered in 2022. Another case that emerged was of this man called Prakash Lonare. Now, he was again attacked by Muslims, and the reason is going to, I won't say amuse you, but shock you to your core. He had responded to a reference of Tipu Sultan with a smiley, with one of those emoticons, the yellow emoticons with a smile. So he was attacked by Muslims simply for posting a smiley face to a reference of Tipu Sultan. How dare you not revere the man who murdered thousands of you? Now, not a lot of time has passed since these killings. The hijab controversy broke out. This was in 2022. Now, I won't get into the hijab controversy. We all know how that played out. It was basically feminists and leftists who call themselves feminists. Madhuji is here. She has more knowledge of the cabal of leftists who claim to be feminists than anybody else. They claimed that it was a Muslim woman's right to don the hijab. Now, why is that hijab donned? Because Muslims believe that if the hair is exposed, it's going to arouse any man, and the woman will be open to being raped and physically abused. Now, it's not just any man. It can arouse even the father, even the brother, even your family members. So that is why the hijab is donned, and the Muslim women are forced to wear the hijab. This concept was peddled as a choice by our liberal feminists and our media ecosystem, and the hijab controversy broke out. The hijab controversy again ended in violence in Bengal, where students were beaten up in one of these schools. Now, as the hijab controversy was just about subsiding, across 5 states, there were attacks against Ram Navami processions, a spate of them. In June, then, we saw the beheading of Kanhaiya Lal, and our great reverend Supreme Court blaming Nupur Sharma for the beheading of Kanhaiya Lal by Islamists. Because how dare a woman have a loose tongue? How dare a woman speak out against the Muslims who are going to go on a rampage? If you hadn't spoken, Nupur Sharma, Kanhaiya Lal would not have been beheaded. Because if you hadn't spoken, the fragile, ever so hurt sentiments of the Muslim community would have stayed assuaged, just to be expressed elsewhere, but at least Kanhaiya Lal would have been spared. Now, while we saw Mahashay Rajpal in 1929, we saw Kanhaiya Lal in 2022. They were murdered essentially for the same reason. Nupur Sharma was essentially hounded for the same reason. Muslims said something, and Hindus decided to respond instead of keeping quiet. I hope Nupur Sharma doesn't meet the same fate. While we saw the Kohat riots in the 1920s, we saw the Direct Action Day in 1946, the Malabar genocide of Hindus, we saw the Delhi anti-Hindu riots now. We saw Barkha's Ladida Sakloon talk about the Battle of Badr now in 2019, while the Direct Action Day was organized and orchestrated on that very day when Battle of Badr was fought and won. The themes remain the same, the characters keep changing over a century. What we refused to see then, we somehow refuse to see now. And let's discuss what that is. Firstly, there is no variant of Islam. We keep saying that Indian Muslims are different. Oh, what's happening in Afghanistan with the Taliban can't possibly happen in India. Indian Muslims are different. Indian Muslims are more peaceful. Indian Muslims are more plural. Indian Muslims uphold the culture of India, the ethos of India. There is no variant of Islam. It's not COVID. Islam is Islam. Quran is Quran. Islam is the same in Afghanistan. Islam is the same in India. Islam is the same in Syria. It is the same Islam that was followed by ISIS. It's the same, Islam which was followed by the murderers of Kanhaiya Lal in India. So there is no variant. Islam is Islam. There is no different version of Islam that the Indian Muslims follow. So if we have to talk about radicalization, if we have to talk about Islam, we first and foremost need to stop assuming that somehow there is a more moderate version of Islam that Indian Muslims are following. Any moderate version of Islam is a Muslim being a bad Muslim. The only good Muslim is who follows Islam to the T, who follows the Quran to the T. So, unless you want to say that all Indian Muslims are bad Muslims, I suggest we stop making that argument. The second is that the Muslim commitment is going to be to the Ummah by and large. The Ummah is, of course, the global Muslim Brotherhood, essentially saying that any nation which is a Muslim nation is a nation for Muslims and a nation that Muslims are going to be loyal to. Any nation which is not a Muslim nation is one which is supposed to be converted into a Muslim nation. Now, Hindu nationalism is very different from Muslim nationalism. There is a reason why Khilafat took seed in India. There is a reason why Indian Muslims were in support of the Khilafat movement in 1920s. It's because their loyalty is going to lie with the caliphate. Their loyalty is going to lie with the Muslim world, not with India. The only reason they might, praise India or be in India or whatever is because they want to turn Darul Harb into Darul Islam. That's Islam's aim, to convert any nation which is a Kafir nation into an Islamic one. The street veto and cycle of violence. We didn't realize then that once the Muslim community goes on a rampage, commits violence, just because you concede to their demands doesn't mean that the violence stops, doesn't mean that you've assuaged them and you've persuaded them to treat you as a brother. The British assuaged the Muslim community by passing 295A after Mahashay Rajpal. What happened? The Kohat riots. The Direct Action Day, Mahatma Gandhi, quote unquote, and Mr. Motilal Nehru kept mum while Hindus were being murdered, while calls for jihad were being given. They spoke up only when Hindus decided to retaliate. What happened? There was enough violence even after we got independence because there was no full population exchange, sadly. So the cycle of violence and the cycle of street veto is going to continue till you acknowledge that violence against kafir is an intrinsic part of the religion. And you will keep conceding to their demands. When they'll ask you for your right arm, the moment you give them your right arm, they'll ask you for your left. And before you know it, they're going to take a sword and chop your head off. And once that is done, they look for the other Hindu to do the same too. So the cycle of violence is never stopping. The street violence is only a threat which is wielded over and over again over the head of a deracinated state to keep taking a knee to their demands. Once you do that, another demand is going to come up and they're going to commit violence again because the demands are not going to stop till India becomes Darul Islam. And the moment it becomes Darul Islam, by the way, they are going to be, hanging from aircrafts and trying to escape to another nation, which is not Islamic, to turn it Islamic. We saw that happening in Afghanistan. Whether it's PFI, Jinnah, or the average Muslim who went on a rampage against Mahashay Rajpal, or during the Malabar genocide of Hindus, or during the Delhi anti-Hindu riots, or the murderers of Kanhaiya Lal, there is no large, lofty reason why they are going on a rampage against Hindus. It's Islam, pure and simple. You're a kafir, you're going to be murdered. It's not because, they are so victimized. They've been murdered and killed for so long. They've been oppressed for so long by these barbaric Hindus that they have no option but to resort to violence. Hindus have done absolutely nothing to these Muslims. These Muslims have gone on a rampage against Hindus and they will continue to do so. There's no lofty ideal of Khilafat. There is no reason of decades of, persecution of their kind by Hindus. None of that has happened. These are just veils that they are going to use to ensure that you don't realize their real motives. Who told us that, by the way? These are not my words. These are PFI's words. In PFI 2047 vision document, they had mentioned categorically that while their aim is to turn India into an Islamic nation, they should cover that intention up by talking about Ambedkar, Constitution, Indian flag, yoga, so on and so forth. So every time you see a mob screaming Allahu Akbar, Narae Takbir and waving the Indian flag, think of what PFI said. That's a veil. That's not reality. They're not fighting for India. They're fighting for Islam. It's like Barkha Dutt. She went to Kashmir once. I'm sure Madam will remember. She was interviewing a stone pelter The stone pelter said कि मैडम मैं इस्लाम के लिए लड़ रहा हूँ. बरखा दत्त said नहीं नहीं नहीं, इस्लाम के लिए नहीं लड़ रहा, आप कश्मीर के लिए लड़ रहे हो, आप गलत बोल दिए, कश्मीर के लिए लड़ रहे हो, फिर से बोलो. नहीं नहीं मैडम मैं इस्लाम के लिए लड़ रहा हूँ. Barkha Dutt knew why that stone pelter was fighting far more than him. So these are all veils that we need to be careful of. The Indian state is neutered. It doesn't matter which political party is in power. Unfortunately, the Indian state is made to take a knee to a violent minority and to a minority that wields street veto with utmost confidence. As I think Sir was saying, Hindus have an extremely short memory. We don't even remember our own victim. Forget about taking to the streets like the Muslims do. So every time the Muslim community exercises their street veto, the state is going to bend to them. The IUML is now demanding for a special law to protect the perpetually hurt sentiments of the Muslim community. Now, whether the state is going to concede or not, we have no idea. But if history is witness, then largely the state has a propensity to agree to the Muslim demands. We saw CAA, the kind of violence that was perpetrated. There is a reason why we are circumspect in the implementation of CAA, because we are scared that they're going to go on a rampage again. Every time a Nupur Sharma happens, the Supreme Court is going to blame Hindus, because Hindus have always been blamed for their own genocide and always been blamed for their own persecution. We've learned these ideals from Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, who we call Mahatma today. And we have still not managed to whitewash and wipe ourselves of that deracination. The two nation theory is theological, it's not political. Now, I will read out three quotes in fact, so you'll understand why the two nation theory is theological and not political. Saeed Ahmad Khan said in 1876, I am convinced now that Hindus and Muslims could never become one nation, as their religion and way of life was quite distinct from each other. 7 years later, he voiced similar sentiments. He said, Friends, in India, there live two prominent nations which are distinguished by names of Hindus and Muslims. To be a Hindu or a Muslim is a matter of internal faith, which has nothing to do with mutual relationships and external conditions. Hence, leave God's share to God and concern yourself with the share that is yours. He says here, India is the home for both of us. However, 12 years later, he states, Now, suppose that English community and the army were to leave India, taking with them all their cannons and their splendid weapons and all else. Who then would be the rulers of India? Is it possible that under these circumstances, two nations, the Mohammedans and the Hindus, could sit on the same throne and remain equal in power? Most certainly not. It is necessary that one of them should conquer the other. To hope that both could remain equal is to desire the impossible and the inconceivable. But until one nation has conquered the other and made it obedient, peace cannot reign in the land. Now, who do you think will conquer the other and make the other obedient? Hindus, really? We saw one Gopal Pata, and even he was asked to lay down his weapons. Now, interestingly, the idea of two-nation theory is older than 1876, where Saeed Ahmad Khan, articulated these views. Karl Marx had said in 1854, the Quran and Musalman legislation emanating from it reduced the geography and ethnography of the various people to the simple and convenient distinction of two nations and two countries, those of the faithfuls and those of the infidels. The infidels is Harbi, that is the enemy. Islamism proscribes the nation of the infidels, constituting a state of permanent hostility between the Musliman and the unbeliever. This is Karl Marx, so it can't be a figment of the right-wing imagination. Sitaram Goel, in his book, Muslim Separatism, Causes and Consequences, I highly recommend everybody reads that book if you haven't. He said, if the Hindus sang Vande Mataram in a public meeting, it was a conspiracy to convert Muslims into kafirs. If the Hindus blew a conch or broke a coconut or garlanded the portrait of a revered patriot, it was an attempt to force Muslims into idolatry. If the Hindus spoke in any of their native languages, it was an affront to the culture of Islam. If the Hindus took pride in their pre Islamic heroes, it was a devaluation of Islamic history. And so on, there were many more objections, major and minor, to every national self expression. In short, it was a demand that Hindus should cease to be Hindus and become instead a faceless conglomeration of rootless individuals. This is Sitaram Goel in his book. So we see that Sir Said Ahmad Khan, Karl Marx, and Sitaram Goel interestingly agree with each other as far as the two nation theory is concerned. We can't blame Hindus alone anymore. Now, we are often told that these problems are going to take care of themselves and it's merely a law and order problem because the Hindus who stayed back in India after the partition stayed back because their unbridled love and patriotism towards India. Is it true? Did they really stay back because of their unbridled patriotism and love for India? And if they didn't, what is now the solution? Because we clearly missed the bus of a full population exchange that at least India deserved, we deserved, Hindus deserved. Because Bharat was torn apart on the basis of religion. For one country became an Islamic nation and we became a deracinated secular nation. To understand this and to understand what the solution might be, we need to go back a little to the partition of India. During the provincial elections in 1946, it is an undisputed fact that Muslims voted overwhelmingly for the establishment of an Islamic nation, Pakistan. In total, 87% of the seats were won by Muslim League in 1946. The calls for an Islamic nation only grew because Jinnah had made his intentions of creating Pakistan clear in 1940. Now, as we've discussed, the two nation theory existed for much longer, but a formal political demand for a separate Islamic nation was made in 1940 by Jinnah in Lahore. He said, Hindus and Muslims belong to two different religions, philosophies, social customs, and literature. It is quite clear that Hindus and Muslims derive their inspiration from different sources of history. They have different epics, different heroes, and different episodes. Of course, we worship Lord Ram, they worship Babur, but that's a separate issue. To yoke together two such nations under a single state, one as a numerical minority and other as a majority, must lead to growing discontent and final destruction of any fabric that may be so built up on the government of such a state. He was clearly saying that Hindus and Muslims cannot exist together. Now, if Muslim wanted a state overwhelmingly in Islamic state, why did they then stay back in India? Why didn't they just leave? So the obvious argument presented is, as I said, that they were very nationalistic and they loved Indians and they loved us Hindus so much that they could not bear the thought of going to Pakistan and they lived in India. But after the partition, several leaders, including Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, were in favor of a full population exchange, which meant that all the Hindus from Pakistan would come to India and all the Muslims from India would go to Pakistan. Even Sardar Patel was in favor of this. Now, while all of these leaders were in favor of a full partition exchange, there was widespread violence between Hindus and Muslims. In this case, of course, it was not just the Muslims doing the killing. Muslims were killing Hindus in Pakistan, and there was violence by the Hindus against the Muslims in India as well. After the partition in 1950, an accord was signed between Nehru and Liaquat Ali Khan, which was called the Nehru-Liaquat Pact. In that, they basically said that there would be no population exchange any further. The Muslims in India would remain here, the Hindus in Pakistan would remain there, and that they would individually take care of their own minorities, make sure that the properties that were taken away from them were restored to them, they had religious freedom, so on and so forth. Essentially, Jawaharlal Nehru scuttled the inevitable population exchange that was already underway and was supported by several leaders of that time. I'll quote from the Daily Pioneer, an old report. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee resigned from the cabinet on April 1st, 1950, in protest against Nehru's failure to take Pakistan to task for the continued suffering of his people. At the cabinet meeting the same day, Mukherjee said, What do you care for us Bengali Hindus? What do you care for the criminal assaults on our women? Enraged at the renewed exodus of Hindus, which he viewed as deliberate, he suggested an exchange of population, which Nehru rejected vehemently. In fact, in Nehru's communication to the Chief Minister of West Bengal, he had essentially said that he was willing to go to war to ensure that Hindus from East Pakistan, which is current Bangladesh, should not come into India. I'll quote what he said. I have been quite certain right from the beginning that everything should be done to prevent Hindus in East Bengal from migrating to West Bengal. I think the Hindu leaders of East Bengal who have come away have done no service to their people. If, as you suggest, things have gone too far already, then naturally we shall all do what we can. But I shudder at the prospect of the magnitude of the human misery that will come in the trains. To the last, I shall try to check migration even if there is war. Nehru said that he will go to war to ensure that the human misery he called Hindus do not come from East Pakistan to West Bengal. Because even though they were being killed, even though they were being raped, even though they were being beheaded and murdered, Nehru couldn't care. He'll go to war to ensure that Hindus don't enter India. Now, after this, the full population exchange did not happen. So now we've been fed with the lie that Indian Muslims who stayed back because they were patriotic. Now, we all know about IUML, right? The Indian Union Muslim League. Now, I would have you know that IUML is an offshoot of Jinnah's Muslim League. They had stayed back in India to ensure that Jinnah's vision stays alive in India. And lakhs and lakhs and lakhs of Indian Muslims had given their patronage to IUML. Muhammad Ismail, the first president of IUML after it split up from Jinnah's Muslim League, had actively participated in the partition movement of the country. And he was an ardent supporter of the creation of Pakistan. Interestingly, Muhammad Ismail, who had claimed IUML was a secular outfit, in fact, supported the retaining of Sharia law for Indian Muslims in the Constituent Assembly after India's independence. So he wanted Muslims to be ruled by Sharia law. Muhammad Ismail, he also bargained with the Congress, in fact, to recognize the League as the sole representative of Muslims. It is widely accepted that IUML was formed at the advice of Jinnah just before he left the country post-partition. According to historians, Jinnah has reportedly said, there must be a Muslim League in Hindustan. The AIML, which was Jinnah's half of the Muslim League, had also observed that the protection of minorities in India depended upon the strength of Pakistan and had promised that they would do all to protect them. Therefore, IUML was just leftover Muslims in India who had their loyalty towards Jinnah and had their loyalty towards Pakistan. So the Indian Muslims who stayed back did not stay back because they were patriotic. They stayed back to preserve Jinnah's vision and to ensure that Jinnah lives on in Hindustan. Now, why do I say this? We can't arrive at a solution to the problems that we face today if we are not honest about the problems that we face. We have to first recognize that yes, good Muslims exist. I will never say that every Muslim is a bad Muslim. I would never say that every Muslim is out to kill a kafir. However, if there are 10 Muslim men standing in front of you, and you know statistics prove, history proves that 6 out of those 10 Muslims would take a sword and chop your head off because you're a kafir. How do you differentiate between the 6 and the 4? Is there a solution to that? I don't think so. Is there a question that we can ask them? Hey, do you want to behead me? But they're going to say no. Even the IUML claims that they are secular. Even the murderers of Mahashaya Rajpal claimed that they did it for lofty ideals. So they're not going to admit that they want to behead you, but behead you they shall. So how do we differentiate between the 6 and the 4? And when we can't, we need to stop giving into these fantastical, romantic ideas that we are all brothers, that we all want to live in peace. Living in peace and living in brotherhood, it is said, requires religious plurality. We all need to be religiously plural. Now, what does religiously plural mean? We say that Hindus are religiously plural and so are the Muslims. Now, when you want to be plural, it essentially means that you have to recognize that every other faith other than yours has a grain of truth to it. There is a grain of truth to that religion, there is a grain of truth to your faith. Now, Hindus are willing to do that. Hindus are willing to say कि इस्लाम में भी कुछ सच्चाई है, राइट? क्रिश्चियनिटी में भी कुछ सच्चाई है. आपका फेथ है, आप जानते होंगे, हम तो नहीं जानते, कुछ तो सच्चाई होगी. But is Islam willing to say that Hinduism has a grain of truth? Is it willing to say that आपके भगवान में भी सच्चाई है? They scream 5 times a day saying that there's no God but Allah, that it's a sin to worship any other idol. Idol worship is considered one of the greatest shirk in Islam. So if one religion is not willing to concede that your religion has even one grain of truth to it, how do you expect our India to be religiously plural when the Abrahamic faiths that exist in India are exclusively against any other religion, even their existence? Forget about conceding to the fact that it has a grain of truth to it. So I think religious pluralism has to be shunned. We need to recognize that Hindus are under siege, not from fanaticism from all religions and all faiths, but specifically from Islamic fanaticism. And the solution, since we missed the bus and we couldn't do a full population exchange, is to recognize the fact that a Christian will convert you, but a Muslim will chop your head off. Is to recognize that difference and to have laws that specifically aim at protecting Hindus against Islamic fanaticism, against their Quran, against their religion, against their book. Even if we don't get into theology, I don't want to contest theology, I don't want to get into the Quran. But look at what's happening realistically and practically for the past 2 centuries, at least. I'm not even going into the Mughal history. Hindus have been persecuted, Hindus have been murdered and raped and killed for 2 centuries, even after the Mughals left, even after the Mughals were ousted. So Hindus need to recognize that Hindus need protection specifically against Islamic fanaticism. Religious pluralism is a punch word that's going to be put on the shoulders of Hindus, of you and me. We are supposed to concede that Islam has a grain of truth, while Islam will never concede that Hinduism has a grain of truth. Islam is always going to say Hinduon ki kabar khudegi. Islam is always going to say kafiron ki kabar khudegi. Islam is always going to say maro kafiron ko maro. Islam is always going to talk about the Battle of Badr. Islam is always going to say Allahu Akbar, Nara-e Takbir. Islam is always going to say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And therefore, you need to shun religious pluralism. We need to shun religious pluralism as a nation, as a country, and recognize that there need to be laws specifically protecting Hindus, not against all religious fanaticism, but against Islam specifically. There is a reason why Ambedkar and Nehru and all of our leaders and the fathers of our constitution, so to say, did not add the word secular to our constitution, because they knew it was not a secular constitution. They knew that it gives protection to Muslims against Hindus without any basis of persecution, because the assumption is that Hindus are going to do to Muslims what Muslims are going to do to, what Muslims have been doing to Hindus for the past centuries. If they are fanatical when they are in majority, then obviously Hindus are also going to be fanatical. If Muslims have murdered Hindus in Pakistan, where only so many are left that you can actually add them in a WhatsApp group in Pakistan, only so many Hindus are left. I think the Prime Minister can just make a WhatsApp group and start giving announcement to Hindus. If they can do that, then Hindus, if you consider this land as your cultural land, as your civilizational state, you too will go and start persecuting Muslims, because the Muslims have done this. We know that when you come into majority, when religions or sections, communities come into majority, they start persecuting. But they forget that Hindus are, unfortunately, I would say, religiously plural, while Islam is not. It is embedded in their religion to subjugate the kafir. And unless we recognize, acknowledge, and understand the underlying hate and the underlying reasons for this sort of persecution that has been going on for centuries, we will not understand the importance of treating India as a cultural land of Hindus, as a Hindu nation that needs to protect the interest of Hindus. The only criticism of Citizenship Amendment Act, perhaps, can be that it did not go as far as to give Hindus a right of return like Israel has for Jews, which means that any Hindu anywhere in the world can come back to India if they feel the world is too cruel. We don't have that. Hindus are second class citizens by our constitution and by legislative practice. So, unless we take concrete steps to declare India a civilizational Hindu state, and unless we rally for legislation that aims specifically to protect Hindus against Islamic hate, the persecution is going to continue, and the cycle of violence and the cycle of street veto is going to continue. We are seeing Khilafat 2.0 in the making. Malabar genocide of Hindus in 1921 happened after 100 years of low-level violence against Malabar Hindus by Mopla Muslims. 100 years, and they did nothing. We are in the midst of those 100 years, and we are building up to a genocide which we will be woefully unprepared for. So, the sooner we recognize the dangers and the sooner we recognize the fact that we are indeed in the throes of Khilafat 2.0, the sooner maybe we can preserve this nation and preserve ourselves for our future generations. Because patriotism is good only till India is Hindu. If India becomes Islamic, you and I are not going to be patriotic. You and I are not going to want to stay in India. So we are patriotic and we love our nation, and India is India till it's Hindu majority, and it will remain so only if Hindus recognize that Khilafat 2.0 is building in front of our eyes. The question is whether we are going to repose our faith in Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi or Gopal Pata. Thank you.